Two. Boom. All right, everybody, welcome back to Melanin Minds, where we are uplifting Black women in the comic book and manga space. Of course, I am one of your hosts, Tashi. I always love when you do that. I'm Ty. Hi. She has so many bars. But of course, huh? No, go. No, go. You know me. Bars for days. And you also have to visit her Kofi as well. Yes. You have to do all those things. But of course, we always try to get the most awesome guests, and this blew my mind. What, like maybe 2 months ago? Today's guest is a comedian. Um, she is a comedian from California who has been in the comedy game doing big things. She was on at one point in time on a list of Black women comedians that you need to know before they blow up. So I mean, if you're just jumping in now, you're too late, but you can still look her up because you still need to know who she is and be following her. She won the Best of Fest in the 2019 Pine Comedy Festival, and then came out with a comedy album in 2022 called Ain't I a Wombat? And I love that name. I don't know what it is about it, but I absolutely love the Ain't I a Wombat. And I get it too. And the whole album is about exploring life as a Black woman and pays homage to Sojourner Truth. And I don't know if it gets better than that. She also has hosted a plethora of shows and produced a plethora of shows on things like Netflix, Hulu, Prime, so much more. She is a co-host of the Astigmatism comedy show, which after finding out what it was, I was like, okay, that's really cool because they also talk about books on there. She's been featured in Emity, NPR, plenty of other magazines and magazine articles, and is the cone owner. What? Co-owner, I don't know where my mouth is today, of Fair Square Graphics that was founded in 2019, where and is also an Eisner nominated for one of their stories, and they produce comics and graphic novels. So like there you go. If you were wondering why there's a comedian on the show, there you go. And so she has also recently released issue 2 of her book, Mutiny Black Girl Magic, which I have to say has some of the most beautiful cover art I've ever seen in my life. So, everybody, please welcome Krystal. Oh, good. I'm always happy. I love when people love the intro because I'm just like, was it good? Did I do good? Cool. Oh. Mhm. Mhm. See, people, this is why you always should be a good person because you never know who you're talking to. Now, if they're a jerk, then I mean, I guess, you know. But as we get started, I, of course, would love for you to tell everybody, of course, a little bit more about yourself besides what I dropped and how you actually got into comics specifically.
Spider-Man and Noir and wrote those series of books, brought that concept to Marvel. And I remember very early on when we were dating, reading that, and I was like, "This is very bold, to give your person you're dating something that you have created. It's very, you have to be proud of it. And it's like, of course, it's Marvel, but it's like that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. And so I took his cue that like he was proud of this that so I read it and I just remember my jaw was on the ground because I had not personally, even through TV and movies, experienced what was possible and the places that he took this character and the things that he was saying about society and
Mhm.
injustice. And it's set in, World War II America, New York, and it is a Spider-Man character, but all of it is really localized in time and in
in a
space
way that
in
made
a way that
sense and
made
actually
sense and
said
actually said
something. It
something.
said
It said
something more than
something
just like
more than
this
just
person
like
has
this
cool
person has
powers,
cool
good for
powers,
him, you
good for
know.
him.
And this kind of
And
started
this
my
kind of
own
started
journey
my
of
own
really
journey of really
embracing
embracing
comics and graphic
comics
novels
and graphic
as
novels
a
as
regular
a
part of
regular part
my,
of my,
like it is part of
it
what
is
I
part of
read
what I
now.
read now.
And I
And
I'm actually
I'm
very
actually
upfront
very
with
upfront
people
with
in
people
general in
in
this
general in
world
this
about
world about
my
my
identity as an
identity as
outsider,
an outsider
because I think I have
because
a
I think I have a
perspective that a lot of
perspective
people
that
who
a lot
grew
of
up
people
with
who
this
grew up with
don't
this
have.
don't
And
have.
my
And my
goal, because
goal,
of that, is
because of
to
that, is to
convert more readers
convert
in
more
my
readers in
generation
my
of
generation
comics,
of
right? Of my
comics, right? Of
generation
my
of
generation
readers. I
of
want to convert
readers.
more
I want to
people to
convert
becoming
more people
readers
to
of
becoming
comics,
readers of comics
because I find
because
that we
I
still
find
have this
that we still
idea
have
among a
this
lot of,
idea
especially
among
Black
a lot of,
women,
especially Black
that
women,
it's for kids.
that it's for
And that if
kids.
adults are
And that
doing
if
it, that they are
adults are
just
doing
like
it,
feeding some
that they are just like
childlike
feeding some
part of themselves.
childlike
And that's
part of
just not
themselves.
really the
And
case.
that's
It's
just not
actually
really the
like
case.
comics that
It's
are being
actually
written
like
for
comics that are being
adults.
written for
And
adults.
a lot of Hollywood is
And
taking their
a lot
cue
of
from
Hollywood is taking their
readership of
cue
comics.
from
And
readership
if
of
we are not
comics.
present in the
And if we
readership,
are not
how do
present
those
in
things
the
get turned
readership,
into movies
how
or
do those
TV?
things
The
get
things that we
turned into
like,
movies or
right?
TV? The things that
And
we like,
so
right?
it's been
Mhm.
really
And
a
so
really fun and interesting
it's been
journey
really a
to
really fun and
not
interesting
only
journey to
start reading
not
comics,
only
but to become passionate
start reading
about
comics, but
converting
to become
readers of comic
passionate
books,
about
and now
converting
writing
readers of
my own
comic
comic
books.
book,
And
which
now
that
writing my
I
own
like to
comic
tell
book, which
people that I
that
was
I like
bullied
to tell
into
people that
writing
I
my
was
first
bullied
comic,
into
because
writing my first comic.
you can't you can't listen, tell me, let me tell you what you don't want to do.
Let me tell you
You
what you
don't
don't
want
want to do.
to
You don't
travel
want to
all over the
travel
country with a
all over the
banner and a
country with
mascot
a
of a
banner and a
beautiful Black
mascot of a
woman for your
beautiful
company,
Black woman
and
for
then
your
don't have no
company,
book with her
and then
story
don't
in it.
have no book
Okay,
with her
you don't
story
want to
in
do
it.
that. Okay.
Absolutely not.
I, I was doing that. Okay,
I was
this is
doing
my
that.
mistake.
Okay,
we were we were this here, there, and everywhere with this banner, and people like, but excuse me, ma'am,
For her
where
story.
is her story?
I would have
um,
asked you the same question.
yeah.
Right.
So I mean, the origins of the character are really cool because it actually started with a magazine. I don't know if you heard of this magazine we did before called Mutiny. So, Mutiny was a magazine that we did that was like a really great blend of the mainstream and the indie comic book world. And it had
Mm.
articles, it had features, and it had about 40 to 50 pages of comic short stories. So you basically had the mix of both worlds, but also like getting to know about the creators behind it. And like some of these short stories are so powerful. And every issue, it came out quarterly, but every issue we would always have one cover that had what became our mascot, Miss Mutiny, on it. And the original character design was by Chris Cross. And we decided that from that point forward, we would always have a design of her for one every issue, and
Mm.
then she became. We threw up on the banner, and then that was kind of, the rest is history.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, love that. I also like to say that it was actually very nice and kind of refreshing to see another couple owned, another married couple owned company
Yeah,
publisher, because like
it's pretty rare.
there's not a lot of us out here,
Hmm.
and there's definitely not a lot of us out here who are doing the thing, doing it actually together,
Hmm.
Mm.
and thriving, and just showing, kindness and
Not everybody can work
realness
together
in
as
front
a
of the
couple,
screen.
that's for sure.
Right.
So the people that can make it out,
So
I think we
I
do.
love that.
We're shining examples to the rest of the world. Nobody can understand us ever. They're like, you work with your husband? Yeah.
No, yep. We're like, okay, but like, how does that work when you make stuff? We just do it.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. How does your background in comedy specifically influence the way that you write your comic?
Hmm. So the thing that I am really good at is dialogue. And something that my husband has said is like the mistake that a lot of people, professionals make, or people are trying to become professional, they make the mistake of trying to be good at everything, trying to train themselves
Mm.
to be good at everything. And he really says you should stick to the thing that you're good at and keep doing that. Like get even better at that thing that you're good at, double down on that. Maybe you learn a few other things on the side, but like that's going to be the best way that you can contribute to a comic book at some point when the time comes for you. And
Mm.
going into this, that is what I knew already because I already had experience doing that for myself, as a stand-up comic, but I also had experience doing it so I wrote for seasons 2 and 3 of The Circle on Netflix. So I wrote the host dialogue, the host copy.
Mm.
And then I did a similar thing for Searching for Soul Food, which was a kind of a docu series on Hulu. Again, writing for the host. And for whatever reason, this is something that I have always been good at, is like being able to get inside of other people's head and figure out what they would have said, to the point that I'll even have dreams sometimes with people I know who will be in my dream, and I'll tell them what they did in my dream, and they said, "That's weird. I would have said exactly that." I said, I'm like, "Yeah, I know. This is how my brain works. I don't know why." And so I came in knowing that, like, okay, world building I semi enjoy, but I'm not the best at. Even story, I like the collaborative part of that, but it's not even fully my thing. It is dialogue that
Mm.
I enjoy. And so a lot of comedy, sure, can come from the story, but a lot of comedy could also come from the dialogue as well. And so that is in terms of like grounding my character and giving her a moment to like, okay, she has a moment where she thinks she's talking to a black woman. How does she switch up her language? What jokes does she make in the moment? Because again, she thinks she's with kin, right? Not knowing this character is like this character is actually passing for even just being human in our world, right?
Mm.
And so I just thought, like, okay, so there could be some humor for
Mm.
that, and there's humor in, a moment where, there was a lot of, I hope it's not happening anymore, but it was like for a period of time, women were getting randomly punched in the streets of New York. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, I want to put that in there, but I want to reclaim that for us. And I want to make it funny, have a funny button on that moment. And so I love when people are at the table at Comic Cons and they'll flip to that page and they see that moment where I like land that little button of humor and I see them chuckling to themselves. And I'm like, I did it. I did it. Um, so yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah. I think it did. I guess for
Yeah.
the audience who might not be familiar
Hmm.
with the story at proper, because you dropped a lot of gems about the story. What can you, I guess, give like a synopsis in your own words about Mutiny?
Yeah, so Mutiny follows Mariah Pleasant. She's somebody who thinks she has it together, but she's actually pretty lost. And she has a job that she's kind of made up for herself. She's basically like the Sheer Seven, but for men, and she makes them pay for it. And she basically is teaching them like how to talk to women, how to get dates with women, but specifically for lost causes. So like people who are like would consider themselves incels. She's like help. She's trying to de-incel them.
Mm.
And so that is her job, but this just sets the scene for one very specific night where she's with a client, and that client has his eyes set on a particular woman, and that woman is not interested, leaves the conversation, and she chases after her, only to find out that this woman is not even human and that there's a whole other world that she ends up falling into. And it's really fun. I have a hard time saying more than that, other than the fact that it's my kind of blend of like, what if it was like a story where it was both Star Wars and The Wiz at the same time, you know? So I love The Wiz. I also love the movie Labyrinth. Those are two huge influences in my life. I've experienced this feeling multiple times in my life of being in a strange place, being alone, having to reacclimate. And I feel like in many ways, the experience of being a Black woman is constantly that. And so I really wanted to have a story where it is a woman who is learning about herself and learning about life and really changing and growing, because of an otherworldly adventure.
Mm. Yeah,
I heard
I'm
Star Wars, Labyrinth, and
right.
The Wiz. So,
Hmm.
I can't wait to get my books because I did back the Kickstarter.
Thank you.
I heard de-inselling incels, and
and,
that's
th-
a
and that.
that's a very very unique concept, especially coming from someone with a comedy background. I just can imagine the hijinks of trying to help find romance and meaningful connection for individuals who basically make it their mission to avoid meaningful connection oftentimes.
Right. And I think some of what I hope to do in this book, because so much of it I wrote thinking about Black women, right? I mean, Black Girl Magic is in the title, but it really is. I wrote thinking
Mhm.
about the enjoyment and entertainment of Black women. I wrote it thinking about what we would enjoy. And I just think there's not enough people that understand how rare that is. Even if the character is being written, drawn by a Black woman, a lot of times, especially if they're hired by major companies, they don't get to prioritize us.
Mm,
And so, this, because it's
Mhm.
not only my comic book, it's my company, I get to prioritize Black women. I get to prioritize
Yep.
them as my audience, even though I hope everybody else will read it, but they are my primary audience. Like, I feel like this is not to compare myself to Beyonce at all, but it's like Beyonce's albums have gotten blacker and blacker, right? And they become more specific in their target audience, even though everybody else is enjoying themselves. And what I've noticed over time is that anytime Black women are having the most fun, everybody else is having so much
Mhm.
fun. I've never seen like an entertainment situation where people are paid to be there, they're paid to see something, where Black women weren't getting their absolute life that everybody else wasn't.
mm.
And so this is my way of reaching everybody, but through Black women.
Love that. And agree 100%.
But it's hard
Man,
though.
I feel like you honestly answered my question already, though. My other question that I had, I feel like you answered it.
Which one? What was your other
Because I was going
question?
to ask how your race and gender, I was going to ask how race and gender and how being a Black woman basically influences your work. But I feel
Mhm.
like you already like really just hit that. Like
Mm,
Yeah.
having our own company and being able to do the writing ourselves, we're able to focus and put us at the forefront. It's perfect.
exactly.
Hmm.
And not only is my artist a Black woman, but my
Mm,
editor is also a Black woman.
mm,
And that is something that I don't think people realize. It's like, I don't know the amount of times it's happened, but I would venture to say that it's no more than five. Because in terms of like that
It's not
entire
easy to
chain,
find.
being a Black woman, being women and Black,
mm.
you're gonna have a man in there somewhere having something to say.
or
And
just
so, go
Mhm.
ahead.
No, I definitely agree.
Mhm.
As I would say, I'm rather new to as a comic book professional, but in the time that I've worked in comic books, I've worked as an editor and as a writer. It's very difficult to get the entire chain. One, to get the entire chain from conception to finished product just to be completely
Mhm.
black. At some point, you end up having to find you'll might not have a you might have a whole all black writing team, but your artist won't be black, or you might have an all black
Mhm.
art team, but your writing team might not be black, or it might not be a mix, or sometimes it's an all male team, but an all black woman team is truly a rarity. And
Yeah.
I can't say me personally that I know of too many projects where it's not a singular person and that's the team.
Yes.
We're all black
Yeah.
women, so that's incredible.
Yeah. I think the only other people I know, like I think Regina's with Lock It Down, I think that's their whole mission is that. So I think that's probably the only time I can say I know of that. I've had the hardest time finding a black woman to do the art
Hmm.
Mm,
because it's hard to find this. I know
It's
I
hard.
actually looked at your artist at one time and was like, oh look, I'm gonna follow her.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
then I'm gonna find you later if I need you.
Yes.
And because yes, I need more of you. And it's
Yes.
actually I'm actually grateful now that we do actually have a new in-house artist and she is a black woman. So I'm
That's great.
so happy about that.
Hmm. That's great. Absolutely. And I think so. I become a huge advocate. So, for people who don't know, like, I am a really unique position, um, in terms of being my first comic book, is that I am often, very often, a in the artist alley in the professional area,
Hmm.
mm,
and that I am also, almost always the only Black woman in these artist alleys.
Hmm.
And what I find is that there's a lot of question about why there's not more of us, and I I think I know why.
mm,
Um, and my biggest thing, and this is why I've kind of shifted my strategy, because I realized with my book that, I looked at the statistics, right? The statistics recently, as of, like, I think 2022, of readers of comic books among adults, it's still almost half, white male. And then after
mhm,
that, it's still mostly male, right?
mhm,
Hmm.
So I realized that I had a problem with my comic book, with my Kickstarter, is that I have written something for people who are not reading comic books right now. I've written something for people who are reading comic books. Like, I know there obviously are Black women who are reading comic books, but a lot of us are. And so I've written something that I that is not going to get to its target audience, because comic books have bad PR for our
mm,
generations.
Hmm.
And so I've started to find ways to, like, okay, how do I incorporate in my talking about my book, talking about who I am as a comic book professional, even talking about our company, how do I bridge the gaps of understanding that not only, um, they can be a part of there being more of us on in Artist Alley by supporting comic books, um,
Hmm.
but they also, they need to participate for their own self, like for their own, like, building up yourself, because I think what happens is when they're only coming to buy comic books for the kids, right? There's an
Hmm.
unintentional bad message
mm,
to the
Hmm.
kid, and is that this is kiddie stuff.
mhm,
This is not something that grown-ups participate in or do. And it's like, well, they can clearly see that they do because there's adults behind the table. But what you yourself as the adult are not reading comic books, you're giving your kid a message that what they're doing is frivolous. It's not
mm,
important. It's not adult stuff. It's not real life stuff. And what if their brain doesn't work to process prose books well? What if
mm,
their brain
Hmm.
works best with a comic book? then what you've taught them is that, okay, when they become an adult, the only books that are adult books are the books that work the worst for their brain.
Mm,
Mm.
that's so valuable. I
And
think
Mhm.
so, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I just that's such an important thing to say. I
Yes.
I did a series recently on my TikTok channel where I was asking people two separate questions. One, specifically, why are people not as interested in animation and in like cartoons or like cartoony things? And a lot of people attribute that to like slapstick humor, or like they think of it as childish. They haven't really
Mhm.
made the they haven't realized that so much of everything that they're already like like explaining to them, like your favorite movie, these Marvel movies, or even if you're not into Marvel movies, some of these TV shows that have kind of been born out of uh these concepts were initially graphic novels
Mhm.
or manga or comic books, but they haven't really understood that yet. And
Yes.
then as far as Black women, um I host a series as well where I try to compare things, like if you like this particular TV show, you might like this comic book,
That's
because for
great.
a lot of people,
That's really
they
great.
they don't have that bridge. They don't really
Mhm.
acknowledge, they haven't acknowledged that, oh yeah, if I love love and hip hop, if I like messy TV dramas, there are comic books out there that are messy TV
Mhm.
dramas. And I just there but there aren't also the visibility of us, people like you and like us that are
Yeah.
out here, like actually how visible are we? I think you raise a really good
Mhm.
point of what's the PR like in the comic book industry. How are
Right.
we being highlighted?
It's and not just how we are being highlighted, but I think the I made this comparison, and this is kind of thing that brought me a lot of visibility, which was I really was grateful for. But I made this
Mhm.
comparison in a post on Threads, basically to the concept of television and the concept of movies, that they're both just other mediums to ingest story. At some point, somebody figured out how to convince people to get TVs into their homes.
Mm,
And if you think
Mhm.
about it, it's like that's a way heavier lift than a comic, right? Now
Yep.
everybody has TVs in their homes, but at some point they didn't. It was just the radio. And even before the radio, people had to
Mhm.
be convinced to get a radio. And so I'm
right.
like, somebody figured out how to do PR for radio. Somebody figured out how to do PR for TV to get them to buy them. Some Nobody's really done PR for comics, and
Mhm.
have it's all been in the direction of men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
They have not cared whether or not we read comics. They have not gone after us to help us feel included, to help us feel like we know what we're talking about. There was all this lingo that my husband was saying that I'm like, slow down. What's a trade paperback? I never heard about that before. Like, you know what I mean? But it's like they're so used to these words and these phrases, and they don't realize some of them, the good ones, they don't realize how um, uh, excluded other people feel. You know, you walk
Mm,
into, I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of them are closing now, and which is unfortunate. But you used to walk, I would walk in at other comic books. I had to go into a comic book store to go to a comedy show, and I'm like, this is,
Mhm.
I'm, I know I'm not every woman, and I know I'm not every person, but in terms of how I like to feel when I go into a store, this don't feel good. Like,
mm,
and
Mhm.
sometimes why is there a smell? You know, like it's not
mm-hmm.
Been a
it's
couple of
not been
those.
welcoming, right? And so you
Mhm.
think like, well, how were we us I'm calling us the lost generations, how were we supposed to be invited into the world of comic books? And so I'm trying to do that now. I love what you're doing about comparing TV shows to comic books, because I think that is exactly what people need. They need bridges. They need to
Mhm.
understand how important comic books are in the world of like learning and ingesting storytelling.
Right.
Mhm.
Um, if I may ask another question, because I think it's like I said, I'm fairly new as a comic book professional as well. When you are integrating into the community, um, how did you learn? like terminology, because you bring up a really good point, like trade paperback,
Right.
LCS for local comic book store, or
Mhm.
CGC. Like these are terms that
Mhm.
they get dropped all the time in conversation, but no one ever really stops to tell you what they are. How
Explain
was
to the
your
people who don't know.
process? How
Mhm.
how did you like how did you bring yourself up to speed with all the terminology within the community?
I think over time, some of it was osmosis and some of it was just like asking my husband. I mean, we have a good relationship, so I
Mhm.
was just very comfortable. I have somebody in my home that I could ask, what did that person mean when they said that? Like, what are you talking about right now? So that was really helpful, but I don't know how you find this out on your own.
Really?
Like it's I don't know if you're not like with somebody. I know a lot of women are coming into
Mm,
comics because they have a partner or they have a friend that's bringing them in, and I think there's
Mhm.
more of that. But uh, that's really how I got. And then the other thing is too, recognizing that a lot of comic book culture is cultified.
mm.
It can be
Yes.
very culty. And
Yes. Very.
I don't think people realize, I think they can understand from like an audience perspective, but I think as a professional, it can be really disheartening because if you want to bring in a new character, like birth a new character into this world that is
Mhm.
not coming from the loins
Mhm.
of Marvel or DC, there is a cult, right? So if the people who are already reading comic books are only in the cult of these houses, I'm never
Mhm.
going to
Mhm.
be able to convince them. Or if I am able to convince them, it's usually just because they see that I'm a Black woman and they want to support, right?
Right.
Mhm.
The problem for me is that um, their attention is so taken up by these other big publishers
Mhm.
or like what they like to see when they see a comic book cover.
Mhm.
So I'm okay for them to read my comic. I would love for them to read my comic. I'm done reaching out to them.
Valid.
Yeah.
Done trying to tailor and try to make my post reach them. I
Mhm.
am
Mhm.
only reaching out to Black women primarily and people that have never read comics.
Mhm.
Mm.
I'm trying to get the people that have never done it because those people are not in the cult yet.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's a pivot a lot of us have done recently, or over the last few years. It's just like, because they are very cultified, which is not even how I thought to describe it before, but I think it works really
Yeah.
well. It's like even the stuff that they do get into a lot of the times, whether sometimes it's because you're Black and they're like, oh, okay, but sometimes it's because, okay, well, that character actually reminds me of a character that I'm already a really big fan of, so I want to try it.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so that's going to be really cool, and because it gives me old school comic vibes and it looks powerful, and I want that.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of times after that there is a falling away, and usually those characters that they are into, because the cult is mainly made up of men, are usually the more male centered stories, and
Yep.
so that's where they
Mhm.
stick, and they don't really kind of turn around and look at the Black women stories, even
Mhm.
if they're from the same company, the same writer, any of those
Mhm.
things.
Yep.
And so
Mhm.
I think a lot of us in indie, especially the women, have been like, yeah, we're going to start talking to those who are not reading or just starting their comic book
Mhm.
journey, because it'll
Absolutely.
be easier.
I mean, I learned this even just from comedy. Like I've done comedy for 10 years. I thought at some point I would enjoy it to the point where I would really enjoy performing for every audience. I don't. I
Mm,
don't. If there is a bunch of grumpy men in the audience, I'm good. Like I don't need to be the one that makes you laugh. I don't need to be challenged to,
mhm,
make you uncross your arms. Let somebody else get somebody else to do it. Like
that's
I would
nice.
much rather make a room filled with like women and queer people or just men that like listening to women than trying to
Hmm.
convince and cajole people that want to be stubborn for no reason.
Mm.
I've always wondered about that, but I didn't want to ask it because we're supposed to mostly be talking about the comics. But like with comedians, like I know some really funny comedians, and I'm sure there's some group of people out there somewhere that doesn't find them funny. It's like, what do y'all do?
Hmm.
Yeah, run into those people. Yeah, just okay, just
You
don't
just
perform
take
for
the
them. I like that.
Um A question I actually have in regards to like, being a comic book professional now, when you're like, because of course a large portion of making the book is once the book is done, pitching it to other people and selling the
Hmm.
book. How has it been connecting with people at your tables and selling those books with your with the experience of your background in comedy? Do you feel like that
In
helps
comedy.
you connect with people when you're trying to push the book, or do you kind of let the book speak for itself?
So this is an interesting question because I did go to my first Comic-Con 5 years ago.
Mm,
I am unrecognizable to myself from 5 years ago. Even before we had the book on the table, um, I really have come a long way in terms of feeling like I am getting to be myself, but I'm also selling and I'm pitching books of all different types and from different creators. I've gotten really good at the pitch and I really good at selling comic books. I'm very proud of my growth in that area. Before my 5 years ago, even though I was a comic, this wasn't my world and I wasn't sure how well I would be embraced by new people, right? Like I wasn't sure like if I was going to get into a conversation. And I've heard this from people before. Like
mm,
I was at a con where a guy was like, "Oh, I just started reading comic books. I started reading all the Spider-Mans, but I didn't want to wear a shirt that had Spider-Man because I was just worried that somebody was going to, start getting me into a conversation
Mm.
and then like, challenge me on everything that I've read." Now, this is
mm,
like more like online behavior. It's not something that you would normally
It
like
is.
experience at a con, but he was still afraid of that. And
mm.
I was worried about that in the beginning. I was worried of making mistakes. I was worried about not knowing references. Like if people said, "Well, I read, Berserk." Well, I haven't read Berserk, I
Right.
don't know how to, so I'm like, how comfortable do I feel like to ask a follow-up? I'm like, okay, can you tell me more about the book so I can understand like where, you know. Anyway, so I got more comfortable with myself and I got more
Hmm.
comfortable even with my identity as an outsider because before I felt the pressure to pretend to be an insider, to pretend. I mean, because
Mm.
people look at me, especially with the glasses, they're like, "Oh, I could tell you were always a nerd." I'm like, "Well, actually, yes, but not that way." Like,
So
um,
look at the big old spectacles. You've been a nerd your whole life. I know it.
and men are so like, I don't mean this in a bad way, but like even some of the sweeter ones, they're
No,
so
please.
excited to meet another woman who reads comics that they immediately
Hmm.
start putting all of their ideas of who you are onto you, like,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and I'm like, slow down. Like I'm not in the cult. I'm
Chill.
I'm just I like it. I enjoy it. I This is a part of my life now, but I'm not, you know what I mean? So but when we finally I knew it was going to be like that perfect, like stars aligning when I finally had the book because I could already tell how people were when they saw the mascot and they just came to the
Mm.
table. I barely have to push the book.
Mm.
It sells itself. People look at it, they want to support a black woman. They love the fact that it's written by and created by an all black femme team. They hear the pitch of Star Wars meets The Wiz. It's over. Like the price point is good. It's like you can look at the you could tell it's quality. Like the paper is quality, the art is quality. So I just feel like it's a good prospect for any even people who are newer to comics. So I know I've convinced a few people that don't read comics. They're like, "Well, I came here for my kids, but maybe I'll get something from me too." I'm like, "Yes,
Mm.
this is the
Same.
goal."
Definitely had a few people. It's like, well, I don't really read comics, right?
Mhm,
Or maybe they read manga specifically and don't read comics. And we've been like, well, no time like the present, right?
mhm.
And had a few people buy, and then they come back and it's like, oh, that was great. It's like, see, comics are good. They're
Yeah,
fun. And now we've converted you for life.
exactly.
Mhm.
Oh, I actually have a weirdish question.
Ooh,
I will.
okay.
it was the question. It was like, oh, that might be cool. Have you ever tested out comic plot lines as jokes?
No, no, because my you mean like for stand up, like live stand up?
Hmm.
Um, no, because my stand up is really about my life. It's like
Mm.
pretty grounded. Sometimes it's a little silly. Now it's possible that something I've told a joke about could end up in a comic. But in terms of like a plot line for a comic, no. Now there is a story that we're working on for a new addition to Noir is the New Black. So that's the book that started our whole company. It's a
Mm.
anthology of short noir stories, all by Black creators. And
Oh,
that is our
okay.
bestseller. It's sold
Hmm,
over
that sounds
7,000 copies
familiar.
now.
No, that's I was just about to say. I remember Noir is the New Black right during
Okay, it
COVID.
sounds
It
familiar.
had
Yeah.
a
Okay,
huge, yeah,
it
it had a
wasn't just me. I
huge
was like, that
push.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, it had a huge
Yes.
push during COVID. I'm excited. I didn't get a chance to have a physical copy, but I think I got a digital copy of it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good
So
book.
yeah, we actually re-released it with two more stories, and then we're gonna start doing
Ooh,
that from time to time. Just keep re-releasing it with more stories. So there is a story that I'm working on for that anthology that is about a Black female comedian.
ooh,
And
I would
right
read
now
that.
the working title is Too Dark for You Guys. Um, and yeah, so I won't say anything more than that, but I'm very excited about this because it's gonna be noir, it's gonna be dark. But yeah, also that's the thing
I love all of that.
that
Yes, that
yeah.
sounds brilliant.
Mhm. So
Um,
Hmm.
really, I've really enjoyed just kind of hearing your
Chit
perspective.
chatting.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying specifically, I enjoy hearing your perspective on the community itself. I
Hmm.
feel like it's a very important thing. I think about when converting people into comic books. A large reason of why may feel intimidated isn't actually the books themselves, but
hmm
it's the mythos of the community, and it's the way that like people within the comic book community come off.
yes.
Um, Even myself, when I initially
Yeah.
moved into the community, and mind you, I've been in the anime community for years. So
hmm
anime manga, it's got its own type,
Got
special
its
breed of
own
people.
credit.
It's got its
Whoo,
own
yeah.
special breed of
Uh,
people.
Yep.
So I wasn't when I was entering the community, I wasn't off put by like the weird people or men quizzing you on things. But I do think there was this level of intimidation of comic books, at least to me, kind of has this regal feel to it. Like in order to be a comic book creator, you have to have this certain level of like, uh, you yeah, someone's got to be a mob. Get it, get it, Tashi. Beat him up. Tell him to get in order. Tell him to get in line. No, you're good.
and the youngest was grouching about something just now.
Oh goodness. Leave my babies alone. They're gonna come see me soon. I need them in peace, in
Okay, I
all
would
one
say,
piece.
okay, you say that now. Wait till I bring them down there next month.
Oh yeah, no, they can't. My apartment's real small.
See,
I'm an auntie that loves them from a distance,
they love
beyond the
them from.
door.
Like I said, they love them from a distance. Wait till I bring them to you in a month.
Ah. um, Goodness, want to say yes. There is this mythos within the comic book community that there's like the best I could describe is kind of like a regalness. Like to be a comic book creator, when you think about like comics historically, there's this like when we think of like Stan Lee, right? He's this incredibly
Hmm.
brilliant, quirky guy who has all like he's just can make magic. And
Mhm.
I think that in
Yeah.
itself as a creative can be a little bit intimidating because you think that all of the work everything that you're going to be reading is going to be Stan Lee level. And then, or, something that's like, oh, this all came from Stan Lee. And then you start getting into comics and you're reading like, oh, this wasn't
Like,
the best.
oh,
Or this is kind of, actually,
my
this is
bad, Mr.
boring.
Kirby.
This is kind of boring, and this is kind of, and it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you guys rallying around this character? Why do we
Mhm.
need 550 Batman comics? And like, you ask those questions and the community gives you a lot of pushback because it's like you're coming in and
Mm-hmm.
disturbing their peace.
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
and then if you try to
Mm-hmm.
give a different perspective of, well, actually, I don't even like Marvel and DC comics. I predominantly read Boom
Oh,
or
Jesus.
Image or Dark Horse or, or Oni Press. Like, I like a lot of indies. And then they're just like, well,
Right.
those comics are good, but they're not like the AAA comics. So I think it's very, I love hearing different perspectives
Mhm.
talking about, coming into the community, because I think it's so important to be like, yeah, it's not actually the books that are scary. Sometimes it's people.
Yeah.
People are the scary piece.
Mm-hmm.
Um and from your
Mm-hmm.
perspective, I know that you said that your husband's super into comics, so that helped you a lot. But when you started, like, I'm guessing you started going to comic book stores a little bit more frequently and attending Comic Cons. How has it been, kind of like, just as a passive observer getting into it, kind of watching this community change? Because I will say a lot more women are involved in the community than there
Mm-hmm.
were before. A lot more people of color are involved. There are a
Mhm.
lot more diverse stories, especially since 2020 with the passing of George Floyd, and with all these different initiatives to push people of color. How has your perspective of the
Yeah.
industry changed?
Well, I guess I want to talk about a few things that you said. One, when it comes to like the regalness of like a comic book creator, I think one of the things that could be very intimidating, especially as a new creator. Like, this is my first comic book. It's not the first thing that I made, but it's the first comic book that I've made
Mhm.
professionally. What was really important for me in dealing with any sort of imposter syndrome is the fact that just remembering at some point somebody made this up.
Mhm.
Like, as much as all these comic book theories and have been codified and this and that and the other, like all these categories now, somebody made this up, and the people that made it
Mm-hmm.
up didn't even make it up that long ago. I mean, it's like, actually it dates back to, like, I think Denmark, like 100 years, whatever. But like, what we know today as comic books is like semi new, and somebody
Mm-hmm.
came up with it at some point. So who gets to say how much like I'm doing it wrong or right? Because it's made up. And the other thing
Right.
I have that a lot of other comic book people, I wouldn't say professionals, but like people who are like deeply, they think they're knowledgeable in this world, is that I have been to Angoulême. Have you guys heard of that?
I actually have not.
Okay, you can throw this in their face next time they want to throw out some facts about the comic book world. So, Angoulême is a town in France. It's in the south of France. The same year that San Diego Comic Con, Angoulême it's a sequential art festival also started. Okay. These cons have been going on for the exact same amount of years.
Mm.
The people here in the comic book world are so cultified, they don't even know about it.
Mm. Yeah.
The rest
That's
knows about
something.
it, and they travel to this festival. They go to Angoulême. Their goal is to go to Angoulême. Their goal is to go to San Diego Comic Con. Those are both on the list. We don't even hear about that here.
Yeah, no.
Exactly. There's a whole world of French comic books. Let me tell you something. When you go into a comic book store in the United States, just a bookstore, sorry, just a bookstore in the United States, where are the comics and what is the section that they get? It's usually just like in the back, which makes you feel
Mhm.
dirty. Okay. And it's one bookshelf. I'll get that later. Sorry.
You're fine.
It's one bookshelf. It's all good. So when you go to a bookstore in France, it's almost half and half. And they're in the
Mm.
front, which, in my opinion, how do you sell a graphic novel without showing the graphics?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when bookstores are going to wake up in this country because, we have comic book stores that are readily disappearing. We need more people
Mhm.
that are curating on both sides of the aisle for prose books and graphic novels. And if they keep putting them in the back, making them feel like, oh, this is a weird thing that you do.
Right.
How do things change? And
Mm.
so when I went to this festival, it was just, I'm imagining both of you have been to like large Comic Cons, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, honestly, imagine a Comic Con with comic books.
You know,
Imagine.
when you say it like that, people are like, "Huh?" But when you think about it, like when you go to
Mhm.
Comic Con, there's not comic books
Yeah, it's
outside of
so
people
strange
selling
that
them.
you say that. Yeah, I will say I think that you bring up a very important point about
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but I want to say almost like just the way that like the way that Americans market books. I will say I've seen a change in some like Barnes and
Mm-hmm.
Noble stores. Recently I went to a Barnes and Nobles and their manga section had extended out, and it's like a big section now, and it's not because it was once like in the very back in the very back of the store, and you kind of look a little weird
Mm-hmm.
going in there. And then the graphic novel section is only one or two other stands, but now it's a little bit larger. I think it is interesting the way that Americans market books. And maybe that's on
Mm-hmm.
purpose for reasons that I can't necessarily go into right now because it'd be too long of a conversation. But maybe that's on purpose.
Yeah,
Um,
save that for a different thing.
that say that for a different time, but maybe that's on purpose. The reason why they try to create that separation. But I have a little bit of familiarity with like the French comic book making community, simply just because I worked with somebody who was making French comic books, and European comic books have like an overall just different aesthetic and different feel than American comic books,
Yes.
which is
And
a
we
little bit
have
Mm-hmm.
jarring to me.
plenty of them. We have like a
Hmm.
lot of our books at my company, First Pro Graphics, are translated from French.
Mm.
So if there
Oh.
are people that want to experience French comic books, which in my opinion, I my husband has a really good explanation of the difference between for manga, French comic books, and American comic books. It's really just about where you're sitting in the theater. So like
Hmm.
manga, you're seated up in
Mm-hmm.
the front.
Yeah.
American comics, you're like right in the middle of the theater, and French, you're seated in the back. So when you're looking at landscapes, you're looking at emotion and how and close up you are in the action and the emotion and intensity of it. It's really about that.
Mm.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a lot of what's popular in all of those markets. But if
Mm.
you're
That's
interested
true.
in reading some French, we have a really good Jewish horror book called Meshuggah, which is set in 1903 Denmark, and it's by Denmark creators that are from Denmark. And we have a book that's called A Boy Named Rose, and that is our book that we were nominated for an Eisner. And it's a genderqueer story set
I
in
saw
1920s
that.
Paris. And this world became so big to me that I can't even squabble with these petty things
Mm-hmm.
that everybody
Mm.
else, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Because I just hear it and I'm like, I hear how small your world is, and I hear how small you would like to keep
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point too. Because like of course I know manga, I know comics. And I'm glad you told me about that because we've actually been trying to get more into conventions that are more around the world and not just in the US. We have
Hmm.
one we're aiming to get to next year. We'll see what happens. Um, but I know like a little bit about like some other stuff because I studied theater, and so I make theater content from time to time, and I talk about like the history behind some of your musicals, some musicals, and what inspired them, where the stories came from. And so I had done one on Sweeney Todd,
Oh,
and
hmm.
talk about essentially where how the story came from those old little, essentially what are would have been considered comics. back in those
Mhm.
days.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so I was like, oh, this is like a comic book kind of thing
Yeah.
almost. And so that made me interested in kind of studying a little bit more about that and learning more about, how comics originated, comics from around the world in other
Mhm.
countries and what they look like. And it is definitely a way larger world than we give it credit for here in
Yes.
America,
Mhm.
because
Yes.
unfortunately a lot of Americans do fall into that stereotype of thinking America is the center of the universe.
Yeah. And this,
Mhm.
and I think this goes back to the question that you originally asked, which was like, how did I go about consuming comics and like seeing the environment around. Once I identified what I feel like is cultish behavior, I was like, oh, I don't have to participate in this cult version of this in order to like it, love it, to
Mm-hmm.
embrace it as mine.
Mm.
And so I consume comics at my own pace. That's really important to me. And I try
Mm-hmm.
to like encourage other people. I don't try to stick to like things that have long series. Like, and if I do, I don't care if I start in the middle. Like, I'm not going to be completionist that way, because that's going to just make me feel anxious and feel behind and feel like left out. Um, and I consume like I basically use comics as a way to slow down my brain,
Mm.
because that is something that
Nice.
I find that a lot of especially women have a hard time with. They're like, I can't get my brain to like look at the pictures. And
Mm.
my thing is like, think about everything throughout our education that was focused on getting work done quickly, reading fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And amount of
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
books completed. We were always
Mm.
rewarded for speed and like how many books you got completed. And I still see us replicating what's been kind of shoved down our throats in our education system, especially like overachieving Black women. This is a very difficult thing to tell your brain to stop and enjoy a
Mm-hmm.
photo, enjoy a drawing, right? And so I'm hoping that more women will embrace this as a way to slow down their brain, as a way to tell their
Mm.
brain that like, you are safe, you're not under the gun, your worth is not determined by how many books you finish or how fast you finish this book. Sit and enjoy and play.
Mm. Mm.
Mm, yeah.
If this was a poetry slam. Oh,
We would
snap,
be.
snap, snap, snap. Oh my goodness. Yes.
I love that you figured
Bars.
that out so fast too, because I think
Yes.
I might be the only one who's been into comics at least for most of my life.
I
Mhm.
You
And
bring
yeah,
up
it's.
so many. Oh my goodness. I just that point about that consumerism, that need to
Mm-hmm.
have everything. When I first got into comic books, I like, oh my goodness, the way I just had this burning passion to just collect and grab
Mhm.
and be on top of the series, and then how empty I would feel and how sad I would feel like if my budget couldn't afford
Mm.
the
Something. Yeah.
books, or if I had missed the series and that the specific shop I went to doesn't have the back issue, or
Mhm.
like going from shop to shop, like it is excessive consumerism, and it's so
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary when the
Yeah.
whole
It
point of the
is.
hobby is just to enjoy
Chillax.
Yeah.
enjoy what you enjoy, grab what you can, of course supporting those storytellers and those creatives, but
Mm-hmm.
it's supposed to be an enjoyable experience, and
Yeah.
somehow in the capitalism of it all, we've kind of gotten away with it, and of course that mostly affects women of color and Black women. Yes.
Yep.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
There's mm.
I just love that you got out of the cult. I just love that you got out of the trying to, be with the cult and reach out to the cult so much faster than the rest of us did. I think it took everyone else so much longer to be like, you know what?
Maybe I
Nah,
won't
I'm gonna do my own
engage.
thing.
But
Right.
I that makes sense to me. I mean, there's tons of things that I'm like, it, if you're in it for a long time and part of your, not just identity, but also like your relationships are built around that, it can be hard to see that. And
Mm.
the other part of that
Mm-hmm.
is the identity part of that, which is that for some reason it's become really important for people to make this a part of their identity, which I don't I think it's good and bad, right? There can be some good
Mhm.
things to it, but I think sometimes it does some bad in that it makes people feel like, well, I'm not a comic book person. And it's like, no, you are a book person. You just haven't found the comic book you like yet.
Right.
Mhm.
And there's something about this becoming a personality. Like I love how we're embracing blurs and blurdom, like that word is like becoming a thing to really raise visibility of like, Black people, we are into this too. But on the other hand, I think
Mhm.
some people are taking it, the people that are not yet fully, you know what I mean, they're like, oh well, I what I like doesn't look like that, so that means I must not be
Mhm.
that. So it's a double edged
Mhm.
sword, and you have to be very careful with it. And the things that I realize really come from the fact that I am I am new, and I have embraced being new rather than trying to hide from being new.
Mhm.
Mm,
Mhm.
that's good
Ooh,
stuff.
it
Man,
is.
I don't know. It's such a very needed perspective. I think
Mhm.
I feel like especially from my own experience, because like I said, I've really only been in like specifically book making and like American Western comics for only about the last 5 6 years, and there really is a very big push when you enter the community to try to just like wise up. Oh, you have to read this backlog of stories from 60 years ago. You
Mm-hmm.
have to
Mhm.
understand this deep entrenched lore from 30 years ago. You have to remember all these series and all these episodes. When I got into comics mainly because my grandfather liked comics, and I got into comics because I liked pretty girls and
Yeah.
doing cool stuff. I like seeing Storm, and I love the X-Men. And
Mhm.
it's so quickly devolved from, oh, I'm doing this because I like this, and or I really want to be a professional in this space, and I want to look like what I'm doing. When I'm really, actually, I'm so thankful that you've managed to have an experience that it was enjoyable from
Mhm.
start to finish, where you were able to enter in kind of on your own terms, and engage in this space in a way that was healthy and meaningful. And now, not only that, now you're a professional and a creative in this space, and you have a team that's reflective of that experience. That's an incredibly
Mhm.
powerful experience to have, and I'm so thankful that you're here to
No,
share it with
thank you.
our listeners.
That's
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
It's my
No.
pleasure.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I have one more question. I think it's a question I thought of recently that I just thought was interesting that I'm probably going to start asking every episode near the end.
Hmm.
And if you could take any comic book that you've read and rewrite the ending, what would it be?
Um,
I don't know if I even know my own answer. So,
I okay. So the thing is that a lot of what I've been reading has been like books that are our books, or that we are like people are pitching them to us.
Mhm.
mm,
I'm like debating if I should say this one, because I'm like, it is one of our books, and I still think the ending is satisfying. But I talked about this to my partner. So the book is called Meshuggah. It's the Jewish horror book,
Mhm.
and it gets into like kind of the occult, and it's kind of like a Jack the Ripper story.
ooh,
I think I just wanted more of the occult stuff, but I'm also like a huge cult. Like I love listening to podcasts about cults, and I think that's part of why I'm like very
those are
quick
always
to
fun.
point out cultish behavior, because I'm like, I listened to that in episode 3, like so I think I wanted more about that, because the ending, though it is somewhat satisfying, it definitely leaves it open for, more to come if they wanted to. It's a good ending, but I wanted more about the Kabbalah, because I
Mm.
just don't know much about it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe I would have it be like end up in a temple, like, because I think it ends somewhere not
Mm.
religious, even though like everything that is happening is like very like it's called related to Kabbalah and I think another cult. I forget which one.
Mm.
Um, I think I just wanted more of that at the
Hmm.
end. I wanted like more of an explanation. I don't know if that's like a fun answer, but it's just literally something that I thought I was like, oh, I kind of wish this at the end of this book, but it's still really good. It's black and white, and I think these are the kinds of stories that I'm like, I'm hoping that newer and even people that have been reading comics forever, I think is going to help more people see this is how we're gonna do this is how we're gonna bridge what's going on in Hollywood. I think if comics can survive what's going
Mm.
on in Hollywood, I think we can change the industry by getting new readers in and by getting more visibility
Mhm.
to these original characters.
Mm.
I think we can change the industry because for like better or worse,
I agree.
Hollywood is taking their cue from readership of comics.
Yeah, better or worse indeed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, of course, excuse me, I always end off on the question basically of advice. Any advice you would give to other Black women in the space who are just navigating? I, and I'm actually going to change it up just a little bit because knowing your background now, navigating being new in this space and wanting to
Mhm,
create their own stories. Any
mhm.
advice for those women?
So I would definitely recommend reading comic books. You don't have to be like a rabid reader, and you don't have to read only like series, but I would read. And something that I find interesting is a lot of women specifically don't know that you can talk to professionals in Artist Alley, but here's a big caveat, right? Because you're asking a professional to give up their time. Yes, they are there and they cannot move because it is their booth, but it is very much appreciated if you support them, especially if they've given you some good advice. So like buy something from their table. It's something that I've noticed a lot is like there is a lot more inclusiveness. There is like a lot more the color and the gender is changing in the the Comic Con space. But again, the same with comic books. Nobody is doing an orientation of, this is what a comic book is. These are all the lingo. Nobody, the same thing is happening with Comic Cons. Nobody's breaking down like, hey, this is typically
Hmm.
what's understood. And so people are making mistakes and they don't realize it, right? So a lot of times they're like taking up a lot of time at the table when that person is trying to make a sale with somebody else. I again, I'm not saying this is women, but every now and then it happens. Um, but I say this to say like a way that you can come off as
Hmm.
professional is to support their table
Mhm.
and have a brief conversation and find some way to follow up with them later, because they're
Mm.
there to sell, and that's something that people don't realize, that people have paid for tables, they've paid for flights, they're there to sell the things that are on their table. They're not just there for fun. It's not like a farmer's market. Like there people that are there at great cost, and
Hmm.
kind of take up their time but not really support. It's like it's not great. It's not a great first entry, especially if you're trying to be a professional.
Yeah,
Mm.
very much agreed. Have definitely dealt with that a few times.
I'm sure.
Not with women though. Not with
Right.
women.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it'll be a
Oh,
mom. It'll be a mom like, okay, talk to my son. How can my son get published? Ma'am,
okay, there is that. There is
that's
that.
not,
That's happened a few times.
you're not doing this. Like, I know you believe in him. You're gonna have to keep believing in him.
Mhm.
Maybe in my inbox somewhere else later,
Mhm.
because
I think our thing is always look, if there's no one at the table, feel free to chill. As soon as people start coming, we got to work.
Move yourself to the side, please and thank
Please,
you.
yeah,
if you don't mind
Mhm.
waiting, move to the side. If not, you follow us on social media now.
yeah.
Our inbox is always open,
Hmm.
but we got to work. We got mouths to feed.
And cosplayers, please buy a comic book. Please buy a comic book, cosplayers.
Mm.
I'm gonna say it because listen, I don't, you didn't say it. You could
especially
say
the
the
ones
music
especially the
fan.
ones that spend a lot of time around the creators, know the creators, and always are talking to the creators and love what the creators are doing. Yes, please do buy a comic book.
And again, I really think it has to do with nobody explained to them the connect. Here's the problem, and it drives me crazy because nobody is explaining this in a kind way, and I'm gonna explain it very kindly, right? You will not get a new character
Mm-hmm.
to dress up as
Mm-hmm.
if you are not supporting the comic book that the character like you're just not going to get
Mm-hmm.
the cycle that gets a new character to you starts with the comic book.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the comic book. And so this is how we get new characters to eventually cosplay. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way I'm going to eventually get people cosplaying as Mutiny Black Girl Magic if people aren't right.
I am.
Yes.
She is on my
Yeah.
cosplay
Okay.
list.
Yeah.
She is in my future plans.
Yes. But I would never even have that possibility if people weren't buying the book, if people didn't
Right.
support the
Mm-hmm.
Kickstarter. It,
Mm.
it starts there. And so we have to help each other out by completing the circle and the cycle of creation. Like
Mm-hmm.
it gets to you eventually, but what if what if you support other original characters? What if we get a slew of original characters that we as women like because we were
Mm-hmm.
supporting the comic book and not
Right.
just
I
buying
Mm.
love
the sword.
cosplaying as
Sorry, I
indie
said
characters. Right. So I love cosplaying as indie characters.
it.
Look, they're always some of my favorite
I love
characters
it.
to cosplay as. So
I
yeah.
can't wait to see your mutiny. That would be great. I can't wait.
Update my
Yeah.
cosplayings, make sure I have all my stuff. Yeah. Get my shopping list together when I finish this December, these 2 December collabs I have.
Uh-huh.
But she's gonna get there.
Yes. I'm excited. I mean, we're issue 3, she gets her outfit in the book. I mean, she obviously has an outfit on the covers, but issue 3 is when she's gonna get. I've already said too much, so you have an exclusive.
Yeah, yeah,
Ooh.
there you go. I love when we
Nobody
get
else
Ooh.
knows.
exclusives, Ty.
Nobody
I
else
love
knows
when we
that.
get that.
That's what issue 3. That's what's gonna happen in issue 3.
I, I'm not on my job. Normally, I try to say, no exclusives. We want everyone to try to support it as it comes
When
out.
have
But
you said
definitely,
that?
I exclusives off the record exclusives are my favorite, because that means I know, but no one else knows. But lucky for our readers, they
Right,
follow us.
right. You have anything else that was, I always close out on the advice question because I just like to linger that there. But anything else you got?
Oh no,
um,
I think. Oh, are you talking to me? Are you talking to
Well,
to Crystal?
both of you.
Me personally, no. I think that the only thing I could personally say is y'all gotta, if y'all not following Crystal, I mean, what are you doing right now? What's happening? What are we
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation about?
Exactly.
yeah, I really appreciate it. This was a really fun conversation, and I have a lot of passion right now because some of these things are still brewing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited. We have these stickers that we did that says I buy comics by Black women, and this is going to
Mm,
be part of my mission because I need to bridge the gap because it is it's it is the most wonderful thing in the world to highlight Black women who are doing comics. It is
mm,
Mm-hmm.
it is even it completes the circle as we've discussed to also buy their comics to
mm,
Mm-hmm.
and to be proud of it and to share with other people that like I am supporting Black female creators in this space because there's just part of why you had a hard time, I'm sure, finding a Black female artist is because
mm.
they exist, but they're
Mm-hmm.
booked and busy
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Because
because
there's so
they're
few
in
of them.
demand right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need more of them. We need more of us here in this space. And part of how you get more of us is by supporting the works of the ones that exists right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is a beautifully said thing for us to go into our Black Woman in Comics Fact of the Day with honestly.
Ooh.
So, Black Woman Facts of the Day is Nyla Magruder. Nyla Magruder is a comic book writer, artist, animator, and the winner of the 2015 Dwayne McDuffie Award for Diversity. She is technically, by all intents and purposes, the first African American woman of record to write for Marvel, even though she's not as acknowledged as such. And she's not acknowledged as such because her story, um, the Year of Marvels, was a one off. It was a one off digital comic, and then that was it. So she's not acknowledged as such by Marvel. And I want to actually accredit Karama. Of course, we know the Blurred Girl, because I read her article on this, and that's how I found out myself. And of course, she herself, I'm pretty sure I've already done a Black woman in comics fact about her, but regardless, she has also written for Marvel. She is the author of the Protectors of Wakanda book, which I do own, and is a really good book. So support both of those women, and of course support all the women you see right in front of you, starting with Krystal, who's going to tell you all the places where you can find her, and of course you'll also be able to find all those links in the description of whether you're on YouTube or Spotify.
Yes. So my album, Ain't I a Wombat, is available everywhere. But you can find my website. It's krystaladams.com. On social media, everywhere, I am the Dark Krystal. And the name of my company, where you can find my book and a bunch of other amazing books, including a great mental health book I didn't even mention called The Fox in My Brain. Just a beautiful nonfiction graphic novel by a Black woman, and along with a boy named Rose. It's fairsquaregraphics.com. And you can also find us on social media at Fair Square Graphics everywhere.
Ty.
Oh, I have to introduce myself too. Okay, yeah. Okay, hi. Um,
Yes,
of
every time,
course,
I'm sorry, you
every
have
time
to.
I'm sorry. I know, I know. It's just I'm not trying to be humble. I just genuinely forget. Um, of course, in addition to supporting Krystal, you can be sure to find me at Black and Culture everywhere. That's BLAQUE, the letter N, KULTURE, on all social media platforms except for Twitter for reasons. And follow my YouTube channel because
Very
new
good
content's
reasons.
coming out soon. Very good reasons.
Yeah. And so, of course, yes, of course, I'm your host, Natasha or Tashi of Midnight Comics, co founder of Midnight Comics. You can find all things Midnight Comics at Midnight X Comics everywhere except for Facebook and YouTube, where it's just Midnight Comics. And we are also not on Twitter. You can also find me at official underscore Tashi J everywhere except for Facebook and YouTube, where it's Tashi J 89. And I also do not have a Twitter. So and of
Me
course, you can
either.
also find all of
Sorry.
our stuff. Oh, good. We're all on a one accord here. You can, of course, also find all of our stuff at www.midnightcomics.org for all comics. You can find me at tashij.com for all things, mostly acting and a little bit other stuff, as the cosplay stuff is still under construction and probably will be indefinitely. But you can always find my cosplay stuff on my social media. So but with all of that being said, thank you guys for tuning in to another really awesome and fun episode of Melanin Minds. And I really hope that you follow everyone and that you tune in for our next episode. And of
Mhm.
course, remember, as I always say, a small spark can create a large flame. And good night.